In the heart of Boston, a city buzzing with energy and ambition, lived Dr. Charles Whitman, a man whose name echoed through the halls of Harvard University. Known for his sharp mind and unshakable confidence, Charles was a professor of mathematics, who thrived on solving problems that others deemed too difficult or even impossible to crack. His reputation wasn't just built on intelligence, it was reinforced by years of relentless dedication to his craft. Yet despite all his achievements, there was one puzzle that haunted him, a problem so intricate, so baffling, that it had earned its own nickname, the infinite loop conjecture. This conjecture wasn't just any math problem. It involved patterns and sequences that twisted and turned in ways that defied logic. Mathematicians from around the world had tried to solve it, pouring countless hours into deciphering its secrets, but none had succeeded. Some claimed it was unsolvable, while others believed it would take decades, if not centuries, before someone could unravel its mysteries. For Charles, however, it became more than just an academic challenge. It became a personal mission. He spent nights hunched over his desk, scribbling equations and erasing them only to start again. The conjecture consumed him, shaping his thoughts and dictating his days. One chilly autumn evening, after yet another long day teaching advanced calculus to graduate students, Charles decided to hold a special seminar at Harvard. The room was packed with eager faces, young mathematicians, seasoned professors, and curious visitors, all drawn by the promise of hearing about the infamous conjecture. As Charles stood at the podium, his glasses slightly askew, he began explaining the problem with the precision of a master storyteller. He described how the conjecture worked, showing slides filled with numbers and symbols that seemed to dance across the screen. But as he spoke, his tone shifted from excitement to frustration. "I've dedicated years of my life to this," Charles said, pausing to adjust his glasses. "And I'm here today to tell you something I never thought I'd say. I believe this problem is unsolvable." The room fell silent. Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by murmurs of disbelief. Unsolvability was a word rarely uttered in academic circles, especially by someone like Charles Whitman. To many, it felt like admitting defeat, but Charles didn't see it that way. Instead, he viewed it as a sobering acknowledgement of human limits. After the seminar ended, Charles gathered his notes and headed home. The streets were quiet, save for the occasional rustle of leaves blown by the crisp night air. When he arrived at his modest brick house on the outskirts of the city, he settled into his favorite armchair, sipping tea and reflecting on the evening's events. Little did he know, fate had other plans for him that night. Across town, Jake Miller was wrapping up another long shift delivering pizzas. At 24 years old, Jake was no stranger to hard work. Life hadn't been kind to him. He grew up in a small apartment with his mother, who worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table. Money was tight, and dreams of attending college quickly faded when reality set in. Instead, Jake took whatever odd jobs he could find, eventually landing a position at Tony's Pizzeria. While some might have seen pizza delivery as mundane or uninspiring, Jake approached it with a sense of purpose. Every route he drove, every customer he met, gave him a glimpse into lives far different from his own. Jake wasn't just any delivery guy. Beneath his easygoing exterior lay a sharp mind and an insatiable curiosity. Growing up, he loved solving puzzles. Crossword puzzles, Sudoku, jigsaw puzzles, anything that challenged him to think differently. His favorite pastime as a child was taking apart old radios and clocks, figuring out how they worked and then putting them back together. Though he lacked formal education, Jake's natural aptitude for problem-solving made him stand out, even if no one noticed. That particular night, Jake was nearing the end of his shift when disaster struck. A sudden downpour drenched the city, making visibility nearly impossible. Squinting through the rain-soaked windshield of his beat-up sedan, Jake realized he had taken a wrong turn. By the time he spotted the correct address, he discovered he'd accidentally delivered the pizza to the wrong house. Cursing under his breath, he knocked on the door, hoping whoever answered wouldn't be too upset. To his surprise, a tall man with graying hair and a slightly disheveled appearance opened the door. It was Dr. Charles Whitman himself, though Jake didn't recognize him right away. Hi," Jake stammered, holding up the pizza box. "I think this is yours." "Well, actually, it's supposed to go next door, but I guess I got confused." Charles raised an eyebrow, amused by the mix-up. "Come in out of the rain," he said, stepping aside. "You look like you need a break anyway." Grateful for the offer, Jake stepped inside, shaking off droplets of water from his jacket. The house was warm and inviting, lined with shelves stacked high with books and papers. A chalkboard covered in equations dominated one wall, catching Jake's attention immediately. "Wow," he muttered, pointing at the board. "What's all this?" Charles chuckled. "Just something I've been working on. Ever heard of the infinite loop conjecture?" Jake shook his head. "Can't say I have. Sounds complicated." "It is," Charles replied, motioning for Jake to sit down. Over the next hour, the two men talked, first about the weather, then about random topics, until Charles found himself explaining the conjecture in detail. To his astonishment, Jake listened intently, asking thoughtful questions that revealed a genuine interest in the subject. Unlike most people, Jake didn't nod politely and pretend to understand. He genuinely wanted to learn. As the storm raged, outside, Charles grew more animated, sharing anecdotes about his struggles with the problem and the countless sleepless nights it had caused. For once, he wasn't speaking to colleagues or students burdened by expectations. He was talking to someone who simply enjoyed learning. And Jake? He soaked it all in, fascinated by the complexity of the conjecture and the passion behind Charles's words. Before Jake left, Charles handed him a piece of paper containing part of the equation. "Take a look at this sometime," he said casually. "Maybe you'll see something we missed." It was meant as a light-hearted gesture, nothing more. But to Jake, those words carried weight. They ignited a spark, a quiet determination to tackle the very problem that had eluded experts for years. Driving home that night, Jake couldn't stop thinking about what Charles had said. The conjecture lingered in his mind, like a melody he couldn't shake. By the time he reached his apartment, he knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just a passing curiosity. This was a challenge he wanted to embrace, no matter how daunting it seemed. The night after meeting Charles Whitman, Jake Miller couldn't sleep. His small apartment felt quieter than usual. The hum of the refrigerator and the occasional car passing by outside doing little to distract him from the whirlwind of thoughts racing through his mind. The sheet of paper Charles had given him sat on the kitchen table, its cryptic symbols and numbers staring back as if daring him to make sense of them. Jake stared at it for what felt like hours, tracing the lines with his finger, trying to decipher the logic behind the equations. At first glance, the problem seemed impossibly complex, like a foreign language written in code. But Jake wasn't one to shy away from challenges. Growing up without much, he'd learned early on that persistence often outweighed talent. He reminded himself of the countless puzzles he'd solved as a kid, the broken radios he'd fixed using nothing but intuition and patience. This was no different, he told himself. It just required a fresh perspective. Over the next few days, Jake's life revolved around two things: delivering pizzas and thinking about the conjecture. Between orders, he jotted down ideas on scraps of paper, napkins, receipts, even the backs of old flyers stuffed into his car's glove compartment. At red lights, he sketched diagrams. During slow shifts, he scribbled notes while waiting for food to bake in the pizzeria's oven. His coworkers noticed the change in him almost immediately. "Hey, Professor Pizza," teased Mark, one of the cooks, as Jake walked in to pick up an order. "What's got you so deep in thought? You're not still moonlighting as a genius, are you?" Jake laughed nervously, stuffing another crumpled note into his pocket. "Just working on something," he replied vaguely. Nothing big, but it was big, at least to Jake. Each new idea brought him closer to understanding the problem, though progress came in fits and starts. Some nights he'd feel like he was making headway, only to wake up the next morning realizing he'd hit a dead end. Still, he refused to give up. There was something about the conjecture that captivated him, a puzzle so intricate and beautiful that it felt worth every moment of frustration. One evening, after a particularly grueling shift, Jake decided to take a detour before heading home. Driving past Boston Common, he parked his car near a quiet corner of the park and stepped out into the cool night air. The city buzzed faintly in the distance, but here, surrounded by trees and the soft glow of streetlights, everything felt calm. Sitting on a bench, Jake pulled out his notes and began reviewing them under the dim light. As he flipped through the pages, something clicked. A pattern emerged, not in the numbers themselves, but in how they related to each other. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. For the first time, Jake saw the problem differently. Instead of focusing on the individual components, he started visualizing the entire equation as a whole, imagining it as a three-dimensional structure rather than a flat series of symbols. This spatial approach came naturally to him, a skill honed over years of piecing together jigsaw puzzles. Where others might have looked for linear solutions or relied on traditional methods, Jake's mind worked differently. He didn't see limitations, he saw possibilities. And now, sitting alone in the park, he realized he might actually be onto something. Excited by this breakthrough, Jake rushed home and stayed up late into the night fleshing out his ideas. He drew elaborate diagrams connecting dots and arrows across sheets of paper spread across his kitchen table. By dawn, exhaustion finally caught up with him, and he collapsed onto his couch, too tired to move. When he woke up hours later, sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the chaotic mess of papers scattered around the room. Blinking groggily, Jake glanced at his work and smiled. Something inside him knew he was close. Despite his growing confidence, doubt lingered in the back of Jake's mind. Who was he kidding? He was just a pizza delivery guy, a high school dropout with no formal education in mathematics. What chance did he really have against a problem that had stumped professors and experts for decades? Even worse, what if he shared his findings with Charles and ended up embarrassing himself? The thought made his stomach churn. Still, Jake couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that he owed it to himself, and maybe even to Charles, to try. After all, the professor had been kind enough to explain the conjecture to him, trusting that Jake might bring a fresh perspective. If nothing else, Jake reasoned, sharing his ideas would show gratitude for that trust. With renewed determination, he spent the next several days refining his notes, organizing his thoughts, and preparing to present them in a way that made sense, even to someone like Charles. Finally, one rainy afternoon, Jake mustered the courage to visit Harvard again. Clutching his papers tightly, he navigated the sprawling campus, feeling out of place among the students bustling between classes. When he reached Charles's office, he hesitated outside the door, rehearsing what he planned to say. Taking a deep breath, he knocked. "Come in," called Charles's voice from within. Jake entered cautiously, clutching his soggy notes to his chest. Charles looked up from his desk, surprised but pleased to see him. "Jake, I didn't expect to see you again so soon. What brings you here?" For a moment, Jake froze, unsure where to begin. Then, summoning all his courage, he blurted out, "I think I figured it out, or at least part of it." Charles blinked, clearly skeptical. "You did?" he asked, leaning back in his chair. "Show me." Nervously, Jake laid out his notes on the desk, explaining his thought process step by step. He described how he'd visualized the equation, spatially, pointing out connections and patterns he believed others had overlooked. As he spoke, Charles listened intently, his expression shifting from skepticism to curiosity. Though Jake's explanations lacked the polish of academic language, the underlying logic was undeniable. When Jake finished, there was a long pause. Finally, Charles spoke. "This is remarkable," he said slowly, studying the papers. "It's unconventional, yes, but it makes sense. Have you tested these conclusions yet?" Jake shook his head. "Not fully. I mean, I've checked some parts, but I don't have access to the tools or resources to do more." Charles nodded thoughtfully. "Well, we can fix that. Give me a couple of days to review your work thoroughly. If it holds up, and I suspect it will, we'll need to share this with the wider mathematical community." Relief washed over Jake, followed quickly by disbelief. Had he really done it? Had he cracked a problem that had baffled experts for years? As he left Charles's office, the weight of what he'd accomplished began to sink in. For the first time in his life, Jake allowed himself to dream, not just of solving puzzles, but of changing the world. Back at the pizzeria later that week, Jake found it hard to focus on his deliveries. His mind kept drifting back to the conversation with Charles, replaying every word in his head. Would Charles take him seriously? Or would he dismiss Jake's ideas as amateurish mistakes? The uncertainty gnawed at him, but deep down, Jake held onto hope. After all, he reminded himself, sometimes the most unlikely people hold the key to unlocking the greatest mysteries. Little did Jake know, his journey was only beginning. For 2 days, Jake waited anxiously, his mind racing with questions and doubts. Had he misunderstood the problem? Was his solution flawed in ways he couldn't see? Or worse, had Charles simply forgotten about him? Each time the phone rang or a notification popped up on his phone, Jake's heart skipped a beat, only to sink again when it turned out to be something unrelated. The waiting was unbearable. Meanwhile, Charles Whitman sat hunched over his desk, poring over Jake's notes, with an intensity that bordered on obsession. At first glance, the work seemed rough around the edges, scribbled diagrams, hastily written equations, and unconventional notations that bore little resemblance to the polished papers Charles was used to reviewing. But as he dug deeper, something remarkable began to emerge. Beneath the surface-level chaos lay a clarity of thought that was both brilliant and unexpected. Charles had spent decades immersed in academia, surrounded by some of the brightest minds in mathematics. Yet none of them had approached the conjecture quite like this. Jake's spatial visualization of the problem was unlike anything Charles had seen before. It wasn't just clever, it was revolutionary. Slowly but surely, Charles realized that Jake hadn't merely stumbled upon a partial solution. He had uncovered the foundation for a complete breakthrough. Still, Charles knew better than to jump to conclusions. He cross-referenced Jake's findings, with existing theories, tested each step meticulously, and ran simulations to ensure there were no gaps or errors. Late into the night, fueled by coffee and sheer determination, he worked tirelessly. By the second day, exhaustion tugged at his eyelids, but his excitement kept him going. For the first time in years, he felt a spark of genuine hope. When Charles finally called Jake, his voice was steady but tinged with awe. "Jake, it's Charles. I've reviewed your work thoroughly and, well, I have to say you've done something extraordinary." Jake nearly dropped the phone. "What do you mean?" he stammered, gripping the edge of his kitchen counter. "For support. I mean," Charles continued, "that your approach is sound. You've solved the infinite loop conjecture. Completely. No one has ever come this close, not even me." The words hit Jake like a freight train. His knees buckled and he sank into a chair, struggling to process what he'd just heard. Solved it? Him? A pizza delivery guy who barely passed high school math? It didn't seem real. "Are you sure?" he asked weakly. I don't even know how to explain all this properly." Charles chuckled softly. "You don't need to explain it perfectly right now. What matters is that you've cracked the code. Your perspective, your ability to see the problem differently, is exactly what we needed. And trust me, once the academic community sees this, they'll understand its significance." Hanging up the phone, Jake sat in stunned silence. The room felt smaller somehow, as if the weight of the world had shifted onto his shoulders. How could he, of all people, have accomplished something so monumental? Doubt crept back in, whispering cruel reminders of his lack of credentials and experience. Who would believe him? Would anyone take him seriously? But doubt wasn't the only emotion swirling inside Jake. Alongside the fear was a flicker of pride, a quiet confidence that maybe, just maybe, he deserved this moment. After years of feeling invisible, of being dismissed as just a delivery guy, he had proven himself capable of greatness. The realization filled him with a mix of gratitude and determination. If Charles believed in him, then perhaps others would too. Over the next few days, Charles took it upon himself to guide Jake through the next steps. They met regularly at Harvard, where Charles helped Jake refine his notes, translate his ideas into formal mathematical language, and prepare for the inevitable scrutiny that would follow. It wasn't easy. Jake often struggled to grasp the technical jargon and formatting required for academic papers, but Charles remained patient and, encouraging. "You're doing great," Charles assured him during one particularly frustrating session. "Remember, the hardest part is already behind you. All we're doing now is putting your genius into words." Their partnership quickly evolved into something more than mentorship. Charles found himself inspired by Jake's enthusiasm and creativity, qualities that reminded him why he fell in love with mathematics in the first place. For Jake, working alongside Charles was a crash course in confidence. With every passing day, he grew more comfortable articulating his thoughts and defending his methods. As news of Jake's achievement began to spread within Harvard's mathematics department, reactions ranged from disbelief to outright skepticism. Some professors whispered behind closed doors, questioning whether Charles had lost his judgment. Others openly accused Jake of plagiarism, refusing to believe that someone without formal training could solve such a complex problem. One afternoon, while walking through the halls of the university, Jake overheard two graduate students talking about him. "Did you hear about that pizza guy?" one said, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "Apparently he claims he solved Whitman's conjecture. Can you imagine?" His friend snorted. "Yeah, right, probably just got lucky, or worse, faked the whole thing." Jake felt a pang of hurt, but forced himself to keep moving. He knew skepticism came with the territory, especially in a field as rigorous as mathematics. Still, the comments stung. Part of him wondered if he'd ever truly belong in this world, where degrees and titles carried so much weight. Emma Lewis noticed, the tension building in Jake almost immediately. A kind-hearted graduate student specializing in applied mathematics, Emma had been assigned to assist Charles with various research projects. When she learned about Jake's role in solving the conjecture, she approached him with genuine curiosity and respect. "Hey Jake," she said one evening after a long day of revisions, "I just wanted to say congratulations. What you've done is incredible. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Jake looked at her, surprised by the warmth in her voice. "Thanks, Emma. That means a lot. But honestly, I don't know if I can handle all the attention. People are already doubting me." Emma smiled sympathetically. "Of course they are. Groundbreaking discoveries always attract criticism. But here's the thing. You've earned this. Let Charles and me help you navigate the rest. Together we'll make sure your work gets the recognition it deserves." With Emma's support, Jake began preparing for the biggest challenge yet, presenting his findings at an international mathematics conference. The event, scheduled to take place in just a few weeks, would bring together experts from around the globe to discuss recent advancements in the field. For Jake, it was both an opportunity and a test, a chance to prove himself on the world stage. Preparing for the presentation proved daunting. Public speaking had never been Jake's strong suit, and the thought of addressing hundreds of skeptical mathematicians terrified him. To make matters worse, he worried about how to explain his solution in a way that resonated with such a specialized audience. Emma stepped in, offering practical advice and rehearsing with him until late into the night. "Focus on the story behind your discovery," she suggested during one practice session. "Talk about how you approach the problem differently. People connect with stories more than abstract concepts." Jake nodded, taking her words to heart. Over time, he grew more comfortable with the material, finding his rhythm and voice. By the time the conference arrived, he felt ready, or at least as ready as he could be. On the morning of the event, Jake stood backstage, clutching his notes and trying to calm his nerves. The auditorium buzzed with anticipation, filled with scholars eager to hear the latest breakthroughs. As Charles introduced him, Jake took a deep breath and stepped into the spotlight. For the first time in his life, he felt like he truly belonged. What happened next would change everything. Not just for Jake, but for the entire field of mathematics. Jake stood backstage, his heart pounding like a drum. The auditorium in front of him was packed, rows upon rows of people, some leaning forward with notebooks ready, others whispering among themselves about the mysterious pizza delivery guy, who claimed to have solved one of the most baffling problems in mathematics. He gripped his notes tightly, his palms sweaty despite the cool air-conditioned room. Every instinct in his body told him to turn around and run, to escape the overwhelming pressure of what he was about to do. But then Emma appeared beside him, her calm smile cutting through his panic. She placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You've got this," she said softly. "Just breathe, tell your story." Charles, standing nearby, gave him an encouraging nod. "They're here for the truth, Jake, and you're the one who found it." Taking another deep breath, Jake stepped out onto the stage. The spotlight hit him, blinding at first, but as his eyes adjusted, he could see faces staring back at him, some curious, some skeptical, and a few openly dismissive. For a moment he froze, overwhelmed by the sheer number of people watching him. Then he remembered Emma's advice. Focus on the story, not the fear. "Good morning," he began, his voice shaky but clear. "My name is Jake Miller, and until recently I delivered pizzas for a living." A ripple of quiet laughter spread through the audience, easing some of the tension in the room. Encouraged, Jake continued, "I'm not a mathematician. I don't have a degree or years of training, but I love puzzles, and when I heard about the infinite loop conjecture, something about it stuck with me." He paused, glancing down at his notes before looking back up at the crowd. "At first I thought solving it was impossible, but then I realized that maybe the problem wasn't unsolvable. It was just waiting for someone to look at it differently, so I did." As Jake spoke, he walked the audience through his journey, the late nights spent scribbling ideas, the moments of frustration, and the breakthroughs that came when he least expected them. He explained how he visualized the conjecture spatially, using diagrams and analogies to simplify the complex patterns. His delivery wasn't perfect. He stumbled over technical terms and occasionally lost his train of thought. But there was an authenticity to his words that resonated with the listeners. Emma had been right. People connected with stories more than abstract concepts. As Jake recounted his struggles and triumphs, the skepticism in the room began to fade. Even the harshest critics found themselves leaning forward, intrigued by the unorthodox methods this unlikely hero had used to crack the code. By the time Jake reached the conclusion of his presentation, the atmosphere in the auditorium had shifted entirely. When he revealed the final step of his solution, a simple yet elegant equation that tied everything together, the room erupted into applause. It wasn't polite clapping. It was thunderous, shaking the very walls of the building. Some attendees rose to their feet cheering as if they'd witnessed history, and in many ways they had. For Jake, the reaction was surreal. He hadn't expected approval, let alone admiration. Standing there under the bright lights, he felt a wave of emotions crash over him. Relief, pride, disbelief. All those years of feeling invisible, of being dismissed as insignificant, melted away in that single moment. He had proven himself, not just to others, but to himself. After the applause died down, the Q&A session began. Hands shot up across the room, eager to ask questions. At first, Jake worried he wouldn't be able to answer them all correctly. But Charles and Emma had prepared him well. With each question, he grew more confident, explaining his reasoning with clarity and conviction. By the end of the session, even the skeptics were nodding in agreement. Backstage after the presentation, Jake was greeted by a flood of congratulations. Strangers shook his hand, introduced themselves, and thanked him for sharing his work. Journalists jostled for interviews, cameras flashing as they captured his stunned expression. For someone who had spent most of his life flying under the radar, the sudden attention was overwhelming, but also exhilarating. Charles joined him shortly afterward, beaming with pride. "You did it, Jake. You really did it. I couldn't have done it without you," Jake replied, still trying to process everything that had happened. "Or Emma. Or anyone who believed in me." Charles chuckled. "Belief only goes so far. What you did took courage and brilliance. Never forget that." Over the next few days, news of Jake's achievements spread like wildfire. Headlines proclaimed, "Him, the pizza guy who solved the unsolvable," and social media buzzed with reactions ranging from awe to disbelief. Universities reached out, offering scholarships and research positions. Talk show hosts invited him to share his story with millions of viewers. For the first time in his life, Jake found himself at the center of attention, and loving every minute of it. But fame wasn't the only thing Jake gained from his newfound success. More importantly, he discovered a sense of purpose. Mathematics, once a distant and intimidating field, now felt like home. Inspired by the support he received, Jake decided to pursue formal education, enrolling in night classes while continuing to work part-time at the pizzeria. Slowly but surely, he began building a future he never thought possible. Charles, too, underwent a transformation. Witnessing Jake's journey reminded him why he fell in love with mathematics in the first place. It wasn't about accolades or prestige. It was about the thrill of discovery, the joy of unraveling mysteries that seemed beyond reach. Together, Jake and Charles co-authored a paper detailing the solution to the infinite loop conjecture, cementing their names in history. Years later, Jake would reflect on that rainy night when fate brought him to Charles's doorstep. What started as a simple pizza delivery ended up changing his life forever, and proving that genius knows no boundaries. Whether delivering pies or solving equations, Jake remained the same humble, hard-working person he'd always been. The only difference now was that the world finally saw him for who he truly was. Extraordinary. And as for Charles, he often joked that meeting Jake was the best mistake he ever made. After all, sometimes the greatest discoveries come from the most unexpected places. In the weeks following the conference, Jake's life transformed in ways he could never have imagined. The quiet apartment where he once spent nights scribbling equations became a hub of activity. Reporters knocked on his door at all hours, eager to capture sound bites for their stories. Friends and acquaintances he hadn't spoken to in years suddenly reappeared, congratulating him and asking how they could get in on this math thing. Even Tony, the owner of the pizzeria where Jake worked, proudly announced that one of our own had made headlines. At first, Jake tried to keep things normal. He continued delivering pizzas during the day, reasoning that the routine helped ground him amidst the chaos. But as invitations poured in, from universities offering scholarships to talk show hosts wanting interviews, it became clear that he couldn't balance both worlds forever. One evening, after another long shift, Tony called him into the office. "Jake," Tony said, leaning back in his chair with a grin, "you're kind of a big deal now. I think it's time you focus on your next chapter." Jake blinked, surprised by the words. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Tony replied, "you've got bigger fish to fry than delivering pizzas. You've earned this chance, don't waste it." Though Jake felt guilty leaving the job that had supported him through so many tough times, he knew Tony was right. With a mix of gratitude and sadness, he handed in his resignation, promising to stop by for slices every now and then. As he walked out of the pizzeria for the last time, he paused to look back at the neon sign glowing in the window. Tony's Pizzeria, best slices in town. It wasn't just a place of work, it was where his journey began. The transition wasn't easy. Fame brought opportunities, but it also came with challenges. Some people doubted Jake's abilities, accusing him of riding on Charles's coattails or getting lucky. Others dismissed his achievement altogether, claiming that solving a single problem didn't make him a mathematician. At first, these criticisms stung. Jake found himself questioning whether he truly deserved the recognition or if he was simply a flash in the pan. But Emma and Charles were quick to remind him of his worth. "You didn't get here by accident," Emma told him one afternoon over coffee. "You worked hard, thought creatively, and proved everyone wrong. That's not luck, that's talent." Charles echoed her sentiments. "Mathematics is about discovery, not credentials," he said firmly. "If anything, your story shows that brilliance can come from anywhere. Let them doubt you. Their opinions don't define you." With their encouragement, Jake began embracing his new role. He enrolled in night classes, determined to build a formal foundation in mathematics. Though the coursework was challenging, especially juggling it alongside media appearances and speaking engagements, he thrived on the intellectual stimulation. For the first time, he felt like he belonged in a classroom, surrounded by peers, who shared his passion for numbers and patterns. As word of his achievements spread, Jake received invitations to speak at schools and community centers across the country. These events quickly became his favorite part of the whirlwind. Standing in front of classrooms filled with wide-eyed students, he shared his story, not just the triumphs but also the struggles. He talked about growing up without much, about failing tests and doubting himself, about finding joy in puzzles no matter how simple or complex. You don't need fancy degrees or expensive tools to be curious, he often said. All you need is a willingness to try and the courage to keep going when things get tough. Trust me, I'm living proof of that. His message resonated deeply, especially with young people who felt overlooked or underestimated. Letters poured in from students thanking him for inspiring them to pursue their dreams no matter how impossible they seemed. One letter, written by a high school girl named Lily, stood out to Jake. "I've always loved science," she wrote, "but everyone tells me girls aren't good at it. Hearing your story makes me believe I can change that." Reading those words filled Jake with a sense of purpose he'd never known before. If his journey could inspire even one person to chase their dreams, then everything, the late nights, the self-doubt, the criticism, was worth it. Meanwhile, Charles watched Jake's growth with pride. Seeing the young man evolve from a nervous pizza delivery guy to a confident advocate for curiosity and perseverance reminded him why he became a teacher in the first place. Together, they collaborated on several projects, including writing a book aimed at making advanced mathematics accessible to non-experts. Titled Patterns Everywhere, the book combined Jake's storytelling skills with Charles's academic expertise, creating a resource that appealed to readers of all backgrounds. Their partnership extended beyond professional endeavors. Over time, Jake and Charles developed a genuine friendship, bonding over shared meals, long conversations, and mutual respect. For Charles, Jake represented the future of mathematics, a field enriched by diverse perspectives and untapped potential. And for Jake, Charles was more than a mentor. He was a guide who believed in him when few others did. Emma, too, remained a constant presence in Jake's life. Her unwavering support during the conference preparation had blossomed into a close friendship, and the two often met to discuss ideas or brainstorm solutions to other unsolved problems. Though neither pursued anything romantic, both focused on their respective careers, they cherished the camaraderie they shared. As months turned into years, Jake's influence grew far beyond mathematics. His story inspired documentaries, TED Talks, and even a biographical film. Yet despite the accolades, he stayed true to his roots. He continued visiting local schools, mentoring aspiring mathematicians, and advocating for underrepresented voices in STEM fields. When asked about his secret to success, he always gave the same answer: stay curious, never stop asking questions, and remember, genius isn't about where you come from, it's about what you choose to do with the opportunities you're given. One crisp autumn morning, nearly 5 years after solving the infinite loop conjecture, Jake returned to Harvard. This time, however, he wasn't there as a visitor or guest speaker. He was receiving an honorary doctorate, awarded in recognition of his contributions to mathematics and education. As he stood on stage in his cap and gown, listening to Charles deliver the introduction speech, tears welled up in his eyes. "Jake Miller," Charles said, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "is living proof that brilliance has no boundaries. Through determination, creativity, and an unshakable belief in the power of curiosity, he has changed not only the field of mathematics, but also the lives of countless individuals around the world. Today, we honor him not just for what he achieved, but for who he is, a true pioneer." When Jake stepped up to accept the degree, the auditorium erupted into applause. Looking out at the sea of faces, he spotted Emma sitting near the front, smiling brightly. Beside her sat Tony, clapping enthusiastically, and farther back, he caught sight of Lily, the high school girl whose letter had touched his heart. She waved shyly, holding a notebook emblazoned with the title Patterns Everywhere. For a moment, Jake allowed himself to take it all in. The cheers, the smiles, the sense of belonging. Then, turning to address the crowd, he spoke from the heart. "This isn't just my moment," he said, his voice steady and sincere. "It belongs to everyone who ever dared to dream, to question, to push beyond what others said was possible. Thank you for letting me be part of your journey, and thank you for reminding me that sometimes the greatest discoveries happen when we least expect them. As the ceremony concluded and the crowd dispersed, Jake lingered on stage, gazing out at the empty seats. From delivering pizzas to standing in the spotlight, his path had been anything but ordinary. But as he reflected on the twists and turns that led him here, one truth stood clear. Opportunities are everywhere. You just have to be brave enough to seize them. And seize them he did. Years passed, and Jake Miller's name became synonymous with perseverance and ingenuity. The once unlikely hero who solved the infinite loop conjecture had grown into a respected figure in both academic circles and beyond. His story served as a beacon of hope for dreamers everywhere, a reminder that brilliance could emerge from the most unexpected places. Yet despite his success, Jake remained grounded, never forgetting the journey that brought him to where he was. By his mid-30s, Jake had carved out a life filled with purpose. He split his time between teaching, mentoring, and working on new mathematical challenges. After earning his degree through night classes, he accepted a faculty position at a small university, known for its commitment to accessibility and inclusion. There, he designed courses tailored to students who might otherwise feel excluded from STEM fields. His lectures were lively and engaging, blending humor, storytelling, and real-world examples to make complex concepts relatable. One of Jake's proudest achievements was founding a program called Curious Minds, which provided resources and mentorship to underprivileged youth interested in science and math. Funded by grants and donations inspired by his own rise to prominence, the initiative offered free workshops, tutoring sessions, and summer camps aimed at fostering curiosity and confidence. Many participants credited Jake with helping them see their potential, just as Charles had done for him years ago. Emma Lewis stayed close to Jake throughout these endeavors, her role evolving from collaborator to lifelong friend. Together, they co-authored several papers exploring applications of Jake's spatial visualization techniques in other areas of mathematics. Their partnership earned widespread acclaim, proving that innovation often thrives on teamwork and diverse perspectives. Emma also played a key role in expanding Curious Minds, using her connections within academia to secure funding and support. Charles Whitman, now retired from teaching but still active in research, remained a guiding force in Jake's life. The two men continued to meet regularly, discussing everything from unsolved problems to personal milestones. On one such occasion, Charles surprised Jake with an early draft of his memoir, an account of his career intertwined with reflections on meeting Jake and witnessing his transformation. "You're not just part of my story," Charles wrote in the dedication. "You're the reason I believe in the boundless possibilities of human potential." For all the accolades and accomplishments, however, Jake's greatest joy came from moments of quiet reflection. On weekends, he often visited Boston Common, sitting on the same bench where he'd first visualized the solution to the conjecture. Watching children play and couples stroll hand in hand, he marveled at how far he'd come since those sleepless nights spent scribbling equations in the rain. Sometimes, strangers recognized him and stopped to thank him for inspiring them. Other times, he simply enjoyed the anonymity of blending into the crowd. One crisp spring morning, Jake received an email that would bring his journey full circle. It was from Lily, the high school girl whose heartfelt letter had touched him years earlier. Now a college graduate, she wrote to share the news that she'd been accepted into a prestigious graduate program in astrophysics. Attached to the email was a photo of her holding a copy of Patterns Everywhere, the book Jake and Charles had co-authored. "I wouldn't be here without you," Lily wrote. "Your story taught me that it's okay to be different, to take risks, and to chase dreams even when others doubt you. Thank you for showing me what's possible." Reading her words, Jake felt a lump rise in his throat. For so long he'd carried the weight of self-doubt, convinced that his lack of formal education made him unworthy of recognition. But now, seeing how his journey had impacted others, he realized something profound. True success wasn't measured by awards or titles. It was about leaving the world better than you found it. Inspired by Lily's message, Jake decided to write a letter of his own, not to someone famous or influential, but to his younger self. Sitting at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee, he began typing. Dear younger me, I know life feels tough right now. I know you're tired of feeling invisible, of wondering if you'll ever amount to anything, but trust me, there's greatness inside you waiting to shine. Don't let anyone tell you that your dreams are too big or your ideas too strange. Keep asking questions, keep solving puzzles, and above all, keep believing in yourself. Because someday you'll look back on this moment and realize it was the beginning of something incredible. You'll meet people who change your life, and you'll change theirs too. And though the road won't always be easy, every step will be worth it. So hang in there, kid, your story is just getting started. Jake printed the letter and tucked it into a drawer, smiling at the thought of the wide-eyed teenager he used to be. Then, grabbing his coat, he headed outside for a walk. As he strolled through the familiar streets of Boston, memories flooded back. The rainy night he delivered a pizza to Charles's house, the countless hours spent poring over equations, the standing ovation at the international conference. Each memory was a thread in the tapestry of his life, woven together by chance, hard work, and a little bit of magic. When Jake reached Harvard Square, he paused outside the university gates. Students bustled past, chatting animatedly about exams, projects, and weekend plans. Watching them, Jake felt a surge of gratitude for the opportunities he'd been given, for the people who had believed in him, and for the resilience that had carried him through dark times. A group of teenagers approached, pointing excitedly at a poster advertising a public lecture titled Mathematics for Everyone. One of them glanced at Jake and hesitated, recognition dawning in her eyes. Are you Jake Miller? She asked tentatively. Jake nodded, offering a warm smile. That's me. The girl's face lit up. Wow, we read about you in class. You're like a legend. Her friends crowded around, peppering him with questions about his work and experiences. Jake answered patiently, sharing anecdotes and advice with the same enthusiasm he'd shown during his early days of teaching. When the group finally dispersed, thanking him profusely, Jake couldn't help but chuckle. Legend? He didn't feel like one. Just a guy who loved puzzles and refused to give up. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light across the city, Jake took a deep breath. Life had thrown him curveballs, tested his limits, and rewarded his persistence in ways he never imagined. From delivering pizzas to standing on global stages, his journey had been anything but ordinary. But perhaps that was the beauty of it. All, the twists and turns, had shaped him into the person he was meant to become. Walking home under the fading twilight, Jake reflected on the lessons he'd learned along the way. Genius wasn't about where you came from. It was about how you chose to use your gifts. Success wasn't about fame or fortune. It was about making a difference, no matter how small. And opportunities weren't reserved for the privileged. They were hidden in plain sight, waiting for those brave enough to seize them. Reaching his apartment, Jake paused to look up at the stars twinkling in the night sky. Somewhere out there, Lily was chasing her own dreams, armed with the belief that anything was possible. And somewhere closer to home, countless others were doing the same, inspired by stories of courage and determination. With a contented sigh, Jake stepped inside, closing the door behind him. The future stretched ahead, vast and full of promise. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew he was ready to face them, not because he had all the answers, but because he understood the power of curiosity, resilience, and faith in oneself. And so, Jake Miller's story continued, a testament to the idea that even the most unlikely beginnings can lead to extraordinary endings.